Okay, this one is for group number 3. I know I've been dragging my feet along for getting this one out, but I did promise to order our group's individual drafts and kind of rank them from my perspective. So some ground rules in regards to that. Number one, what I say here, this is kind of my opinion. I'm approaching it with a certain perspective, so I could be well off base. I can overlook some things, so take this all with a grain of salt. This is kind of meant to drive discussion and further opinion there. So feel free to correct me and bring up things that we don't go over that we kind of miss. Number two, speaking of my perspective, the way that I'm kind of ranking these teams is I'm projecting the general strength based on not only strong Pokemon, but also how well they complement each other, general synergies, but also as we get lower into the tiers, are they picking up any value that helps to make their team a little bit more flexible, or just add some general utility that could be useful in a particular matchup. Think of something like Stonjourner, where it has the power spot ability that is just generally useful across the board. You may not opt to use the Stonjourner, but just having it there as an option, especially if something like a Dragonite could use it, is I think gives some points for consideration. I also will be ranking my team here, so expect a little bit of bias, just a little bit. Again, just my opinion. Feel free to differ in that opinion. And then lastly, despite how I am ordering these teams, the standings themselves can end up very much different, because of course it's down to the player to bring out the potential of the team selected, no matter how good or not as good I believe that team to be. Because if I'm being honest, for my group, I think everything, or just about everything, brings something unique to the table to where they could actually make a pretty solid impact against whoever they match up against this season. So with all that said, let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to start from the bottom of the list at number 10, where I have the Ghost Guy. You can see they're rocking the Among Us Lucky Arcanine at the top of their list. And that's where we have to kind of put our focus on, because the rest of the team doesn't look too impressive. Not a lot of synergies moving along from there. Like obviously we see Abomasnow and Titan, but on their own right, they're not like the strongest things in the toolbox there. Even if we add in the Frostmoth as a third ice type, which is not necessarily a good thing, especially considering that Frostmoth is, while potentially powerful with that great special attack stat, being much slower and also being a bug type, just makes it kind of a liability for the team. So yeah, from the lower tiers, not looking at a lot in my opinion, and kind of honing in on the first 3 and maybe first 4 Pokemon here. We've seen Among Us and Arcanine on balanced teams, even in standard format teams. So it's nothing new, and it's still pretty solid. Having the utility of a slow spore makes it harder for the opponent to move, and just having redirection into such a bulky Pokemon also gives you room to launch your offense. Same thing for Arcanine, having both Intimidate and Snarl Will-O-Wisp helps to provide that disruption while soaking up some relevant hits, and again provides some room for your offensive measures. But that's where I see the team kind of lacking a little bit. Even if we look at this chart here with the general offense, the attack stat, highest one is going to be Bramblegast, followed by this Titan. Base 115 is not the most impressive stat in the world. And on the special attacking side, we did see Frostmoth there. Again, base 125 is excellent, but it's coming from Frostmoth. And then there's this huge gap coming down to the Belly Bolt at base 103. Regieleki kind of helping to make up for that gap with its transistor ability, but it did receive that recent nerf from 1.5 power boost down to 1.3, so even it may find itself lacking in a little bit. To kind of boost that damage, the team does have access to Lumina Crash from the Espathra, but you're gonna have to set up that turn, or very likely gonna have to set up that turn with the speed boost so you can get ahead of the Pokemon you want to support, namely the Regieleki. So that might require like 2 speed boosts depending on how you do the EVs. But by that point, the opponent's already set in 2 Pokemon, one to address the Regieleki, one to address the Espathra. Having to rely on such a shaky setup could make it difficult to pilot this team. Also, curiously enough, I do see the Brambleghast there. There have been some recent hype around this Pokemon thanks to some videos circulating. But usually you're seeing the activation of Tailwind to then get the activation of the Wind Rider ability, increasing the speed and kind of going from there as far as improving your overall damage. But on this team, you don't have like a fast or priority Tailwind setter. I think the only one is the Frostmoth here, which, again, in combination with everything else, is not looking too impressive. So I'm mainly looking at these, first few Pokemon here. And while Amoonguss and Arcanine can help to survive the storm, I'm wondering what kind of offense we're launching behind that to try and win the game. That's kind of the question that we always ask. Okay, these Pokemon are cool, but how do they win the game? And I think while you can kind of play the slow game and chip away, it's hard to actually close out the game with the Pokemon that I see available here, at least in my opinion. At number 9, I'm placing Eldrim, a returning group mate for me from season 2. You can see to round out their tier 1s, they went with Landorus Iron Hands, which I think is a pretty solid combination in a vacuum. Each of these Pokemon is individually amazing. The Landorus name speaks volumes, and Iron Hands has just always been a solid pickup, even in standard format. Together though, the Landorus with the sheer force and the potential of Sandsear Storm is just really powerful and potentially difficult to deal with if you don't have a flying type. That's where the Iron Hands comes in. Those flying types want to answer to those high powered wild charges. It can be their guest, right? They're gonna have to rely kind of on Levitate to get around that successfully, and they've already picked up the Rotom Wash, so that becomes a little bit more difficult as it thins out the available Pokemon pool from that. From there though, while there's some individual callouts, the Pokemon after that I don't find all that impressive, or at least I don't see like any synergies that really help the cause. Lilligant, the Hisuian Lilligant, to be honest, I'm not convinced of the Lilligant's prowess myself. I do know that it gets the Victory Dance ability, but it's still relatively frail. The base power, if you're not able to get off that Victory Dance, the base 105 attack stat is not the most amazing thing. Granted, it does get Leaf Blade and Close Combat, which can help make up for the lack of like raw stat power. But it's not for me. I'm not really a believer. I'd rather see it on like a Sun team so that you can activate the Chlorophyll ability, and then at least I'm a little bit more confident in the utility that you can provide if you don't get off the offense that you want to pull off. So the Sleep Powder is on the field and a potential threat to go along with a stab close combat, right? Articuno, same thing. It's kind of like I want to see it on a weather team. I want to see it like on a snow team so it can activate that snow cloak. On its own, the abilities aren't all that amazing. It does get some like generally nice bulk and the ability to use Tailwind, so it has some points there. Even combined with the Iron Hands and the Landorus, ice, electric, ground makes for some great offensive coverage, and it mixes things up a little bit by being on the special attack side rather than the physical attack side. But just overall, I don't have full confidence in it as a Pokemon, with it being an ice type and having no other synergies to kind of mix in. Similar note for the Barraskewda, but it doesn't necessarily need to activate Swift Swim. It does have the Propeller Tail ability, which I think is pretty nice. Just getting around Rage Powders and Follow Me's is always a good point, especially when you're that fast and that strong. So I can see it putting a dent in the early games of some matchups just from that alone. So I don't hate it as a pickup, but again, I'm seeing like 3 weather setters or weather utility Pokemon that don't have the weather automatically activated for them on this team. Almost seems like they were looking to counter those matchups once they got to them, and just wanted to have those in place, which I don't hate the most. But I think kind of generically, if the weather is not there, the team kind of suffers a little bit. And they have to kind of rely on Landorus, Iron Hands, Rotom Wash as the stars of the show. Maybe the Barraskewda and even the Goodra as a defensive utility sometimes I think is cool. Um, they also have Gothorita, so they can also kind of like trap certain matchups in, kind of snipe them out with the Landorus or the Iron Hands, maybe even the Barraskewda for some matchups. So they have some utility there, but personally, I'm not too impressed with the overall effect of the draft itself. Coming in at number 8 for me is Killjoy's team, and they opted for the Cresselia Ursaluna combination that everyone is familiar with by now. Cresselia just being bulky and with the option to Trick Room helps supports the Ursaluna. Naturally slow but incredibly powerful, but also gets to launch off stab earthquakes, which the Cresselia avoids thanks to its levitate ability. So just a really cool kind of closed loop between those two Pokemon. Not too impressed by the remaining Pokemon though. Defensively speaking, there's not a lot you can switch into. That's the main portion of your bulk, right? You could say like Pachirisu is there. You can make like a bulky Pachirisu, but its natural stats aren't really that bulky. It's just that we're diverting all of our EV resources into making it bulky. Everything is just like really offensive after that. Like even the Grass Water Fire core of Hisuian Typhlosion, Greninja, and the Hisuian Decidueye. They're kind of these glass-ish cannons, I would say. Like we see, like Greninja is kind of like more catered towards Choice Specs moveset, just being blazingly fast, but not incredibly powerful without using like Choice Specs. But it does get a wide array of moves to kind of pivot into certain matchups. Whereas the Hisuian Typhlosion, we're really just looking at fire moves, like kind of a common or like the most well perceived strategies that it does get the option to Eruption. So something like a Scarf Eruption could come in handy for certain matchups. And then the Decidueye, it does get its signature move, the triple arrows, which can be devastating. Get a 50% chance to reduce the opponent's defense, as well as having a high crit ratio. Could help bolster the team's damage a little bit. But as far as like performing under Trick Room once Cresselia sets up, you're hard set into the Hisuian Decidueye and Dragalge. Of course, you can kind of cater the Typhlosion. It's not the fastest thing alive, but it's typically not a speed that you would see a Trick Room user attributed to. So I'm mainly looking at Cresselia, Ursaluna, Decidueye, and Dragalge as the main performing Trick Room mons. And given their prevalent weaknesses, at least for the Decidueye and Dragalge, it's not like you can't rip them to shreds even once the Trick Room goes up. If they don't score a KO, they could find themselves in the dumpster just from one hit, which is my main concern here. But that being said, they could be potentially powerful once they do get set up, especially Dragalge with the adaptability ability. I think can go a little bit underrated, because with a base 97 special attack stat, it doesn't look all too impressive. But when you use the 2 stab moves and get the extra effectiveness off of it, similar to Regieleki, the boost definitely helps carry the damage a lot. Especially from Sludge Bomb and Draco Meteor when they're hitting neutral. Of course, you're not going to get a lot of super effective hits because there's only so many Pokemon that Dragon is effective against, only Dragon, and that Poison is effective against Grass and Fairy. So mostly just a strong way to hit everything neutral across the board. But again, just having those 4 times weaknesses exposed kind of leaves my opinion of it a little bit wanting for more. For number 7, we have Mr. Skelly Bones here, and I was actually pretty excited to see this one. If you were there for the stream, I kind of went over the story of looking at the draft, where I noticed that they were picking things like the Iron Valiant, the Iron Leaves, and then I saw like, are they picking only Cork Drive Pokemon? I almost thought they were going to pick the Thunderous with Prankster to set down the electric terrain for them. And I was just as I was planning to get Iron Thorns is when I realized this. And I was fortunate enough that they had gotten skipped for that turn. I'm very sorry. So if they were aiming for the Iron Thorns, I had already picked it up. That said, again, I was excited for this one because I think that activating Cork Drive could be a potentially powerful strategy for this team. Of course, they're having to use Pincurchin to set down the Electric Surge, which is not the worst thing in the world. I don't have a high opinion of it as a Pokemon, but having an automatic setup for electric terrain for these Pokemon just makes a lot more sense than trying to set down the terrain through having to spend like a whole move slot for it, right? And when these Pokemon get going, they can be pretty devastating. Iron Moth, Iron Valiant, just alone, some of the I believe, yeah, outside of Iron Bundle, just like the fastest Cork Drive Pokemon that you can get, I believe. And they're incredibly powerful in their own right. Like, taking a look at the special attack stats from both. Let's see here. Did I do that correctly? Yeah, base 140 and 120 respectively. And then even on the physical attacking side, Iron Valiant has that base 130 attack stat. Iron Leaves with a base 130 attack stat as well. So neither are no slouch. And if they get a chance to either boost that offense through the Cork Drive, like versus slower teams, then they become even that more devastating. And then versus speedier teams where they need to outrun them, they can lean into the special, the speed boosting side as well. So there's a little bit of flexibility there and a lot of potential offense coming out from all these Pokemon. My concern is where it comes to the defensive side. Outside of like their, for the most part, pretty decent special defense across the board, most of these Pokemon are frail. We'll just put it plain. Most of these Pokemon are pretty frail. So if the boost in offense or the boost in speed is not enough to get them over the damage hump, they could be falling in 1 to 2 moves without much of any recourse. It's a very glass cannony team, especially when your terrain setter is the Pincurchin. That being said, with a well-mounted offense, I think this could be particularly devastating, kind of like the dark horse of our group, because like it looks like a meme, and might have been meant for fun when they approached it, but I think it could be. It has a lot of powerful tools in the right hands. Also, haven't spoken about it, but the Magneton, I think, is a decent-ish pickup for helping to deal with other steel types. You can either go with the analytic ability, make it this strong special attacker that also gets the boost from the electric surge. You also get to use the Eviolite to bolster its defenses a little bit. Or if you have a matchup versus a steel type, you can use the magnet pull ability and then set the Iron Moth in front of it, and you just kind of guarantee the knockout unless they like use terror or something, which I think is pretty cool. But yeah, very glass cannony, very I want to see it make an impact. I'm a little bit afraid of it myself, but overall, as far as like the construction, I'm not going to rate it too highly because I do want to see what the player can do for it. Number 6 is Messeroc's team, and this is the one where they are the final pick in our group, and on the wheel they selected both Fluttermane and Iron Bundle, which is incredibly scary. I don't think anyone else thought to do that. Two of the most prominent and two of the fastest special attackers in this current format, and they're side by side as tier 1 picks here. If you can pretty much use both on the same team at all times, or flexibly use one over the other depending on the matchup. But from there, like everything looked a little bit weird going into the rest of the draft. They picked slower mons with the ability to Trick Room, which is fine, as long as you have a plan for it. Creating that diversity in the speed, along with having Trick Room is a valid strategy, where you can kind of like lead off by using the Trick Room, and then as the Trick Room ends, find a way to pivot into the faster mons, kind of like catch the opponent off guard. It's very valid, but once you see these two incredibly speedy picks, it kind of like throws you off a little bit. But that being said, they picked some solid mons in for Red Giraffe. Again, standard format, we've seen it. Just in general, even if they're not going for Trick Room, you have the Imprisoned Trick Room to shut that down. Having the Armor Tail ability to stop any fake outs from incoming and infecting the bundle is also a very valid utility. Means you don't have to rely on the Psychic Surge from the Indeedee if you don't really want to. Scizor as your resident Steel type. Steel type is always welcome in these kinds of formats because like the good ones are at a bit of a premium. And then also Mudsdale and Rotom, I think are underrated as just general as Pokemon in their own right in these draft league formats. Mudsdale, pretty strong physical attacker, pretty solid ground type as well. With the stamina ability, only gets even bulkier, and you can just like slap an assault vest on it, call it a day. Use things like body press as the stamina ability activates on its own, so you're not relying solely on anything like iron defense to boost that damage. Just really good. Rotom also is a solid pickup in tier 3, especially if you were to be lacking a grass type Pokemon. This is as solid as you can get, I believe, especially with the electric typing to help fend off any flying types that would normally threaten the grass typing. So pretty solid crew overall. Even picked up the Fungus just as an alternate answer to Amoonguss, so you're not using your tier 1 slot on that. But I'm wondering if they have the game plan to pivot between that fast mode and that slow mode, because with the slow mode, with the Trick Room mode up, like I mentioned, even though these are good Pokemon overall under Trick Room, like the Scizor and the Mudsdale, they don't really stand out as these things that kind of win the game. Maybe Scizor if you get the option to like Swords Dance freely, and you have like valid targets to where things like Scizor and Bullet Punch can clear the field after that Swords Dance. But overall, you do want to see something like the Ursaluna, right, with that even greater attack stat than what the Mudsdale can offer, or something like the Armarouge, where over the psychic terrain you're getting the expanding force, which is not only getting the extra power from the expanding from the psychic terrain, but hitting 2 Pokemon at once. It doesn't really have those options. It just has decent options under Trick Room if it gets set up. So like a lot of the heavy lifting is done on the faster side through that Flutter Mane and Iron bundle, which could get away with murder, but if it doesn't, the team could find itself in a little bit of trouble, which is why I didn't rate it too high either. For number 5, I'm actually going to place my own team, and I'll try not to rant too much on this one, but I think I did pretty solid overall. I mentioned before that my approach was to go for a little bit more balance across the board and try and find value through each and every one of my Pokemon, which I believe I accomplished. Rillaboom and Heatran, again, standard format stuff. You've seen them as a combination work in tandem for this very solid defensive unit, while also being a pretty solid offensive unit as well. Paired with things like Gyarados, complete my Fire, Water, Grass core, and then Sandy Shocks kind of fills in the gaps like offensively through the ground and electric typing. Thunderbolt, Earth Power is just a solid combination, and anything it can't hit, the Rillaboom and Gyarados, or well, Rillaboom, Heatran, and Gyarados can hit, in tandem with that. Everything from there is just utility on a 4-need basis. Like the Gardevoir is my resident Fairy type, the Persian's my resident Dark type and General Disruptor, and then we also have like the Fletchinder, just to have priority Tailwind at like incredible value. A tier 5 priority Tailwind setter is pretty cool in my opinion. Things do kind of get wonky with the remaining picks because I'd already filled out my core. These are just kind of like alternatives to what I have on the front end. So for example, one week I might run the Heatran if I feel like the matchup isn't really favorable for it, but I still want like a solid defensive um, flying normal resist. I can pivot in the Iron Thorns. If I'm not feeling the Sandy Shocks, I kind of want more speed that even Booster Energy doesn't want to offer. There's the Hisuian Electrode, and with the Gyarados, um, if there's just a matchup where I need to resist ice naturally, I can pivot in the Vaporeon instead. A lot of flexibility amongst all the tiers. That's what I was aiming for, so that I can use my main core, the Rillaboom Heatran, and then just kind of pick and choose whatever I want to target certain aspects of any given matchup. Um, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I do think it has a few holes in that regard because even though I'm using my Fire, Water, Grass core and the Sandy Shocks, those first 4 Pokemon, I still have to fill out the team on the back end, and there are going to be some shared weaknesses, regardless of what I pick there, which can make it a little bit scary to move around. So it's not perfect by all means, but I am very confident in the approach that I took. Still some room for improvement, but we've got a long ways to go and trades are still open. In the number 4 slot, I have Armatroner, who is actually taking over a slot from someone who's left the league, but they're keeping this team exactly the same. So Dondozo, Tatsugiri, Murkrow, Sylveon, and alongside Tauros Fire version and the Flamigo. This is the same song and dance that we've known since Series 1, so nothing too surprising here. Dondozo, Tatsugiri, it works. You have the option for Perish Song to get rid of the Tatsugiri once it's inside the Dondozo. And then once the commander ability is activated, you can bring in the Flamigo with its co-star ability. Now you have 2 really strong threats on the field where if you haven't like hazed it away, well then you're kind of screwed at that point, right? And outside of that, you still have a very strong special attacker in the Sylveon, and a pretty solid offensive Pokemon and defensive utility in the Tauros as well. So it's just kind of well-rounded on all fronts. It is, generally speaking, front-loaded into the Dondozo Tatsugiri, so you can kind of cater your responses to it. Since this is a draft league, you'll know you'll be facing what you'll be facing ahead of time. So you can kind of plan out for it, which does lower its stock just a little bit. But I'm banking on it just being generically strong, even despite that, and very streamlined in its approach. So that's where I think the value comes in. You know what it's gonna do, but can you reliably stop it? And even if you can reliably stop it, the well hasn't run dry. So pretty solid team overall, well positioned. Unfortunately, once you get past the Flamigo, nothing in the tier 4s or tier 5s stand out, but I think that's okay. Everything up front is very solidified and it just works. For number 3, I have Sonito's team, and they're no stranger to running a Sun team, or in this case, even a Sun Room team. And I think this is pretty well balanced out. I could rank it a little bit lower because the diversity in offense, as far as like physical versus special, could use a little bit of work. But when everything is being boosted by the sun, not sure it matters all that much. Walking Wake plus Torkoal is just a really strong combination. Walking Wake getting those 3 core moves that can cover just about everything. We got Draco Meteor, Stab Draco Meteor at that, Stab Hydro Steam, which only gets boosted in the sun. So like the first ever water move that we have in the sun that gets a boost in power rather than a reduction in power, and it's stabbed, is incredibly strong in my opinion. And then it still gets Flamethrower on top of that. So the combination of the two just allows it to do an incredible amount of damage across the board for most matchups. Anything that you can't hit or may have trouble hitting, you have the Glamora on the back end. Helps to cover for a lot of Terras through that Sludge Bomb, and even the access to things like Earth Power and an Energy Ball. Mainly looking at the Sludge Bomb, as that would be the main detractor for fairy types that want to take the Draco Meteor away from Walking Wake as an option, right? Even the utility of Tinkaton and Hariyama as your resident fake out users. They have unique typings in the steel, fairy, and fighting types. Fighting types I think are undervalued in this draft league just overall, or at least how people use them. Getting a stab close combat is very valuable in certain matchups versus like steel types, which again are valuable in their own right. So the ones that people pick up, they're under threat from stab close combat. But yeah, just having general bulk and fake out pressure from both of those Pokemon pair particularly well with something like Lilligant, who wants to get a sleep powder off, or the Yuxi, who wants to set up a trick room for something like Hariyama or the Torkoal. Even on the back end, Electros as a levitate electric mon, while it's not the bulkiest thing in the format, again can work under the trick room. Has a pretty solid attacking stat to work off of, and a wide variety of moves to go through too. Some of the punches like Fire Punch, even close combat to shore up its coverage, can make it dangerous for certain matchups. And then we got some general utility from the Sneasel as one of the faster Pokemon on the team, the fastest mon actually, outside of using something like Booster Energy or Chlorophyll, to add some of the some diversity into the team and some disruption with another fake out. Even things like Snarl, Icy Wind, Taunt, the list goes on. It's just a pretty solid utility overall. What I respect most about this team is, kind of in similar to how I think about my own team. They found value all the way across the board through just about all of their tiers, while still maintaining some level of synergy and type diversity, so that they can address matchups appropriately. I think this one is really well done. Again, I think I could rank it lower if we're valuing the fact that it could use a little bit more physical punch. Unfortunately, they missed out on getting the Hisuian Lilligant, which would have helped out with that, as it had been drafted earlier, but they still get the Lilligant at the end of the day. For my silver medal, and they can complain to me about this later, I'm giving that one to Keystone Records. Just from the front end of their draft, they've picked a lot of powerful Pokemon. The Enamorous Therian, Hisuian Gudra, Volcarona, Wochien, Hisuian Samurott, and Raichu. So the main thing about this team that I like, even though that they're on overall the slower end of the spectrum, even outside of something like Trick Room, they're just generically tough to break. Enamorous Therian, just a relatively bulky Pokemon with the Overcoat ability, so can't really put it to sleep with like Sleep Powder or Spore, can't redirect it as much as the Amoonguss would like to redirect away a Moonblast from it, which it hits really hard with said Moonblast at a base 135 special attack stat. The Gudra with both Shell Armor and Sap Sipper, paired with Shelter and Body Press, that's tough to break. Volcarona, another kind of underlooked at Pokemon in draft league setting, being both flexible in that it can Quiver Dance to add more to the offense, and even to defense since it boosts special defense, or being more of a defensive utility with its own Rage Powder and Will-O-Wisp and Struggle Bug. Combined then with the Wochien, the Tablets of Ruin, just really makes it tough to cut through these initial 4 Pokemon without just the right tools. And then I think that's pretty scary on its own. Not only that, Raichu, can't be understated how valuable of a utility this Pokemon is. With Fake Out, Nuzzle, the access to screens, access to Eerie Impulse, even things like Feint and Helping Hand are always just valuable tools to make it a really cool disruptor in most matchups, which is going to be helpful for the Hisuian Samurott, because it's not as bulky as the aforementioned Pokemon, the first 4 in the group, but it's still very powerful with the sharpness ability and all of its cutting moves. So if it gets a little bit of leeway to move, perhaps with the screens or by setting up the nuzzle to lower the opponent's speed, then it can like do a lot of damage from there. It's also protected from any electric attacks thanks to that lightning rod from the Raichu. Just all in all, these first 6 Pokemon I think are incredibly well-rounded and strong in their own right. Past that, they still have access to the Rapska as their resident Trick Room setter. So we talked a little bit before about how like they don't necessarily need Trick Room just because they're just so bulky, but any advantage helps. So if they have an angle for a Trick Room, perhaps with a Fake Out from the Raichu to set things up, then none's the wiser, right? Can talk a little bit about the Palisand as well. Going to be the resident ghost type for the group and resident ground type if needed. Still works pretty decently under the Trick Room. The abilities may end up going to waste unless you pair the Palisand with the Hippopotas and get that Sand Veil going. So a little bit of utility, a little bit of value from the the bottom tiers as well. But mainly just the first 6 speak out to me as being very well-rounded. Just in isolation, if you want to run these 6 Pokemon at all times, I think that you could, but there is a little bit of flexibility on the lower end of the spectrum here. So I really like it. Really good stuff. And last but very far from least, at the top of my list, I have Vic 01's team. And you can immediately see why this one's just incredibly scary. Tornadus Urshifu, yes, we did let that happen because we were focused on our own strategies there. But we're no strangers to this. The Tornadus with the Prankster Tailwind and Rain Dance helps to set up the Urshifu very excellently, boosting the power of those surging strikes. With the Unseen Fist behind it, makes it very hard to defend against. I even like the option of the Hisuian Arcanine rather than the regular Arcanine. Not only adding some offensive utility with the Head Smash backed up by the Rock Head, but adding a valuable flying resistance that would otherwise potentially threaten the Urshifu and force it to Terra. Remains to be seen whether or not that flying type lives the surging strikes, but that's another story in itself, right? The Mimikyu behind that, adding a valuable ghost and fairy typing. So you got like 3 additional immunities to add on top of that. Makes for a pretty solid defensive utility as well that you have to then chew through. Then it also threatens, applying the Will-O-Wisp, a full spectrum of moves like Play Rough, Shadow Claw, Shadow Sneak, even Wood Hammer for certain matchups, like against opposing water types that the Urshifu can't break through necessarily with the surging strikes, is always welcome to the party here. So I think just a very solid core from these Pokemon all together. Behind that, they do have some value in the lower end of the spectrum. The Earthworm just being the resident steel type, but also getting that Earth Eater ability helps it to switch into ground moves that are aimed into the 4 times weakness from the Arcanine. But also think for a moment, if you get that shed tail off, and then pass into an Urshifu and then let that thing fly off the rails, that's always trouble. So it's something that another defensive utility that you have to break while still also dealing with Tornadus or Urshifu. They did opt for a little cheeky strategy here where they could potentially skill swap Pure Power from Medicham onto the Slaking, which that is an incredible amount of trouble if they end up pulling that off. Don't want to see that. Very scared of that. They did pick my namesake in Umbreon, so I'm a little bit mad at that. They also picked the Inteleon that I was aiming for just the round that they picked it on, so I'm still a bit salty at that. As a matter of fact, they have both my team mascots in the Inteleon and Urshifu, so they got a target on their back. That's all I'm gonna say. But nonetheless, I do respect their team quite a bit. It's very streamlined while being very powerful and having a lot to offer both offensively and defensively. That just works against most of the cast, despite what matchup they run into. Similar to the Dondozo, they do kind of have to watch out because we kind of know what the game plan is, so you can kind of prep for it accordingly. But they got the right tools to where it's like, can we really stop it? And you know, the answer is probably no for most of the teams here. All right, so here's just another look at how I rank the teams in our group. Again, number 3. Again, mainly just my opinion and how I view the game. Like overall, the reason it took me so long is because I legitimately think for most of the teams here that they have just something unique, and still like synergistic and strong, that it's kind of hard to flesh out everything in the middle. Like I had a pretty good idea of, like, the top and bottom spectrums for me. But yeah, these can all be shifted around quite a bit. And again, where they end up standing, later on in the season is up to the players themselves. So we'll see how that goes. And I'm pretty excited to see what happens. Legitimately, my dark horse and who I'm keeping eyes on is Mr. Skellybones with the Cork Drive Pokemon. I do kind of want to see those pop off. Not against me, of course. But I do want to see that make an impact and see how well they can pilot it. But yeah, let me know who you're rooting for, how you would order this list, if you think someone deserves to be lower or higher. Let me know. I'd appreciate hearing from that in the comments. And of course, leave a like while you're at it. Either way, I'll see you in the next video. Take care.